Hi everyone, and welcome to another webinar in the series Restart 2021, which we have done in partnership with Economy Next. The Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom Sri Lanka office has put together this wonderful series that looks at how businesses and the country can rebuild in the post-COVID era. Vaccination rates are rising. Governments are talking about living with COVID. So this topic, sustainable supply chains for a competitive advantage, is something that is very close to the heart of the FNF Sri Lanka office, because we've done a lot of events and presentations, and also training a lot of companies, particularly SMEs, to kind of get their sustainable supply chain going as well. And there'll be more work in this as well. I'm truly delighted to have three wonderful personalities who are experts in this area, and also those aware of the kind of developments that are happening around the world on sustainability and the incorporation of that into your supply chain. I have with me Andreas Hergenröther. He is the Chief Delegate of the German Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Sri Lanka, better known as AHK Sri Lanka. Dr. Ravi Fernando is the Chairman and CEO of Global Strategic Corporate Sustainability. And obviously, Sarinda Unamboowe does not really need any introduction as well. He is the MD and CEO of MAS Creda. So I'm going to start off with Andreas, because the EU is a very, very important player and has a deep and long-standing trade relationship with Sri Lanka. That's what people don't appreciate. This is a very long relationship, and it has evolved in various phases and as an important and trusted trading partner for Sri Lanka. Andreas, you have wide experience in economic diplomacy, and you've seen the growth of sustainability and sustainable supply chains. Can you just give us an overview of the kind of recent legislation and also the consumer pressure that is coming within the EU as well for sourcing from those who have a sustainable supply chain?
Thank you very much for your introduction. In fact, the EU is a very important export market for Sri Lanka. It is the most important. It wasn't the most important in 2020. The total volume was about $3.2 billion, and within the EU, Germany is the most important market. In fact, Germany is the third most important export market for Sri Lankan exports. And therefore, it is very important to see the developments with regards to sustainable supply chains. And we have different legislations already in place in different European countries. We have, since a couple of years, the Modern Slavery Act in the UK. We have the Loi de la Vigilance in France. We have the Child Labour Act in the Netherlands. And we have also, since June 2021, passed by the German Parliament a new law on due diligence and sustainable supply chains. And this new law is also enforceable. That's a difference to previous legislations or initiatives of the German government. So from 2023, it will be enforceable towards importers directly. And it will start with larger companies employing more than 3,000 employees, but it will then continue also for smaller ones. So there is a clear direction from the political side towards sustainable supply chains, which will then thoroughly examine if the importers, and they are focused by the law, and their suppliers indirectly will comply with sustainable development goals in the context, of course, of human rights and responsible business, which means then, of course, social and labor standards and also environmental impact. We have also currently a discussion on the European Parliament to pass a supply chain law on the European level, which should then even go further than the German regulation, which I think in its kind is a pioneering legislation because of its strong enforceable degree. This being a reality now on the political side has been a reality on the consumer and industry-driven import side for many years already. In fact, if today a Sri Lankan company wants to export to Europe, even to a discounter or supermarket chains that are very much price driven, they need to comply with sustainability standards. These sustainability standards are not required by the legislation, the European legislation or the legislation by the member state. These requirements are then required by the particular discounter or importer or wholesaler, and that's a reality. And we have seen that very lately when we organized in the field of organic farming a huge conference followed by individual B2Bs. And before we organized this conference, the different discounters and importers were giving us the standards that are required. So you have, of course, that was on organic farming, the organic standards that are required. And you have then the food security standards, which are also not required by law. It's also very important to know about IFS, BRC, ISO 22000 and other standards, but then you have the sustainability standards. And I was really also impressed how thoroughly the German and European importers were inquiring about these standards. All the Sri Lankan companies that we had in the B2B meetings, we screened them before and they had certain sustainability standards. But to have the certification is already very good and a very important step. But of course, you have to document it then also in the future to get a longer and broader market access. This is a great opportunity for Sri Lankan exporters because we have sectors also where I would say Sri Lanka has advanced more than other countries here in the region. The apparel sector, which has been also criticized during the pandemic, but the initiative Garments Without Gills, which was set up already in 2006, and I think MIS will say something about it, was, I think, a step already in the right direction. So there is a certain sensitiveness. And we know also that there are quite a lot of exporters that, especially in the field of consumer goods, that have been already certified according to the relevant standards, which are today Unamboowe, BSCI, Social Accountability 8000, SA 8000, or CEDEX SMETA, for example. And what we are currently doing in a project jointly with the Naumann Foundation and the Berlin-based think tank, Learning Human Rights and Responsible Business, think tank that is headed by the former Commissioner of Human Rights of the German government. We support Sri Lankan suppliers to verify internal procedures and to proceed to gap assessments to adapt their internal procedures so that they would comply to a possible certification according to one of these sustainable supply chain norms. And I think that's very important because we see that as a great opportunity for Sri Lanka to get a broader market access to the European Union, to the US as well, because there are similar standards in place in the US. And we are also aware that some of the Far Eastern countries, such as Japan or Korea, are also working on that. So in the end of the day, sustainability is a reality already, consumer and industry driven, because these standards are in place. They depend and vary from country to country, from importer and retailer to wholesaler, but they are a reality. And I think it's very important. That was also our message, what we were giving during the conference, to create awareness for that, to anticipate developments with regards to sustainability on the business side, and to identify in that way also potential customers and potential partners. Yeah, and we hope that the Sri Lankan government is also committed to sustainability, that also the frame for broader initiatives then in other sectors such as tourism. We discussed this at the beginning of the week with the Minister of Tourism and the chairperson of the Sri Lankan Tourism Development Authority would also then take place. And we know there we have other standards. The Global Sustainable Tourism Council is setting these standards, and we have accredited international bodies that make sure that these standards are complied with, such as BEVLI or TourCert in Germany.
In 2005, Sarinda, there was an opportunity like this, right? The multi-fiber agreement was ending. I was old enough, I would say, to remember this period where, there was so much of fear and trauma about what this will mean to the industry. And then, the Sri Lankan, led by MAS, came up with this whole Garments Without Guilt and the whole sustainability supply chain. And it has given you a huge competitive advantage, which is, I think, still, sustaining you right through even this pandemic. Can you give us an insight into, thinking at that time and your approach, and then how the journey has evolved?
At that time, the apparel sector had lived primarily on a diet of quota garments. So a lot of people made huge buckets of money in that period with very little effort being put into any kind of improvement in their process, in the product, in the quality of their workers' life, sustainability. Any of that stuff wasn't paid attention. But what we as a group did very early on, when we saw that, it wasn't a surprise. We knew it was coming. So a lot of preparation went into it. Like, for example, what Ravi did with Women Go Beyond. We also looked at the sustainability side of the business. We looked at innovation, we looked at design, and started adding a lot of value to the offering that we were giving our customers. So what happened was we had built a huge level of trust there. We were very compliant in every standard that all the brands had set for ourselves, from labor to environment to chemical use to all that stuff. And basically we just built on those to create an identity for ourselves that was very, very competitive in the global market, with or without quotas. So those of us in the industry who made those changes were able to not only compete, but grow very, very aggressively over the next, I would say now 16 years. We continue to grow extremely aggressively. And even though, if you compare with the Bangladeshers and the Indonesias of this world, we are still a very small segment of global exports, more as a result of a small population compared to those countries. They're still very competitive with some of the bigger vendors. And I think that emphasis that we put on the human capital, on environment, on the supply chain, looking at waste, looking at water, looking at energy, looking at the environment, and of course the people, those were the huge factors that helped us to stay competitive.
What are the key ingredients of setting up and maintaining is as important, I guess, as setting it up of a sustainable supply chain?
Okay, hi Imran, and hi Sarinda and Andreas. Good Abend. So I think the Sarinda was spot on this idea, because one of the things that at the time the chairman of MAS, Mr. Mahesh Amalian, he had a chat with me and said, this multi-fiber agreement is coming up, and it looks like we are going to be very vulnerable to the lowest cost manufacturers, and we are by no chance anywhere close to lowest cost, because we couldn't actually compete either on productivity or low cost versus most of the apparel manufacturers in the region. And what I began to do at that time was pay a visit to all the factories, and I began to see a pattern of compliance, a pattern of commitment to sustainability, even though we were not calling it sustainability. What I found was a whole pattern of sustainability practices that were in the organization. And when we looked carefully at that time, we also realized there was then the emergence of a few brands in the world who are now trying to position themselves on a sustainability platform. And Marks and Spencer was trying to do this, Gap was trying to do this, and they were trying to differentiate themselves globally on a sustainability platform. So what we did at the time was then, like Sarinda said, I got this wild idea on a flight. We were going, I think, for a Speedo global conference or something like that. And I just wanted to bounce this idea of someone who was already very much in the forefront of the garment apparel sector, and that was Sarinda. And I just wanted to check with him if this idea of differentiating on a women's empowerment platform, but meeting the hygiene conditions of environment sustainability made sense. And I must say, when Sarinda listened to it and he gave me the confidence that this might work, then of course I went 110% into it. And in 2003, we launched what was then known as the Women Go Beyond program at MAS. And the Women Go Beyond program at the time, we had about, I think, 40,000 employees, of whom 92% were women. And what we also found was everything we made, by and large, was focused on women at the time. We were actually a big player in the intimate business and also, in the activewear businesses. So Nike and MS were important to us. And we launched the program in 2003, November. But the launch was internal. What we did was, first we said, let's get everyone at the leadership level and at the operations level totally committed to this program. So we took 2 years to internalize the Go Beyond program within the company, and people like Sarinda were extremely supportive, and because I needed the CEOs of the companies to totally buy into this. And we had a launch event, I remember, at the Touch. And after that, we internalized it with sessions in every factory. We went factory by factory, spoke to the employees. I yet remember speaking to Sarinda's team in Linea Aqua, I think, at the time. And there were like 3,000-4,000 or 2,000-3,000 people. And what I said was, every single employee must know why we are doing this, what we are trying to achieve, and strategically support it. So we launched this. And I think within a year of our launch, we had won the American Apparel and Footwear Association's Best Women's Empowerment Program. And we were also then won a Nike Award and a Victoria's Secret Award for excellence in sustainability strategy. And very quickly, this program evolved to be DNA of MAS. And I think to this day, it differentiates it. But I think the icing on the cake for MAS and for every one of us in Sri Lanka was when the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon invited MAS as one of the 10 companies selected as best practice in sustainability and awarded us the top 10 award for the Women Go Beyond program. So with all these accolades, what happened was then the Sri Lanka apparel sector cotton on this, and JAAF, I think it's called, contacted Mahesh, the chairman of MS, and said, can we use this campaign for Sri Lanka? And to be very honest, I was probably one of the first people to say, don't let them do that, because of a simple reason, because I knew that MS had leaders who were totally committed to this. I knew that we had the chairman committed to this. I knew we had CEOs who had understood this. But you don't go with a claim unless everyone's on board. And we took 2 years to get everyone on board. So what I said was, let's not let them call it Go Beyond, because that will dilute our program. They can call it whatever they like. I will give them all the support, and I will give them the material. And we did give them the material. And of course, you're right. So for me, a simple definition of a sustainable supply chain is where a business has a economic growth model where it is absolutely entrenched that we don't harm the environment, but we enhance and regenerate the environment in terms of planet, and at the same time, contribute to the social and economic progress of all humanity. So to me, that is where you have a sustainable supply chain. So we focused on building sustainable supply chains. And I think one of the challenges of sustainable supply chains in the 21st century is that we have not only now crossed some very important boundaries, which are known as planetary boundaries in terms of global warming and in terms of extreme weather incidents, which was now recorded in the World Economic Forum as the biggest risk to the planet. So what I see is, with the last 20 years being the hottest years the planet has experienced, and by the way, yesterday's news says this year is the hottest ever, and July was the hottest month. I see a massive challenge to supply chains coming from extreme weather incidents, which are has, as you know, devastated the microchip industry and Toyota and Volkswagen have cut down their production by 40%. It is also going to devastate Sri Lanka's agricultural sector, because extreme weather events like droughts, like extreme heat and unprecedented rainfall, sometimes a month's rainfall in 1 hour, are going to also affect the supply chain. So I think even as the topic is sustainable supply chains, I think what we have achieved in Sri Lanka is very creditable, because we have had leaders who understood the term. But the question is, how do we now circumvent and proactively manage the reality we are going to face in the future?
Thank you, Dr. Fernando. Yes, Andreas, please.
2 points. I think, of course, we can discuss academically what is the meaning of sustainable supply chains, but I think that does not lead anywhere, because there are clear definitions to certain standards, and these standards are required by the importers. And I think today I'm representing the German chamber. I am doing a business-oriented dialogue. So if our target groups, I think these are companies, and these companies have to understand these norms do exist. And as much as I appreciate that Sri Lankan initiative Garment Without Guilt, and I think in that context of time, 15, 16, 17 years back, it was also a very good move. But today, we don't have to forget there are international standards like BSCI, SA 8000, CEDEX meter, and so on. And these are required. And it is very dangerous, as it is also done in other sectors, to believe we are creating here our own philosophy and we are awarded by a private association and that's enough. Definitely, it is not enough. I think it is very important to be aware that if we want to get this broader market access to the EU and the US, you have to comply with these standards. That's what has MIS done for many years. MIS was the Without Guilds and other CSR initiative, and is definitely the pilot here in the country. But on the we always have seen that reality and have also then complied with these international standards. And that is very important message to really be aware of globally recognized standards, not really to waste time to build your own standard which is not recognized. And I think this message should be clearly sent out also then to the government, because what was achieved, as you also rightly said, was majorly driven by the private sector. And today also we have a lot of sustainability discussions with regard also to agriculture, with regard to renewable energy, energy consumption, and so on. And I think these are very good moves, and even with regards to tourism. But also there we had 2 days ago the discussion, what is the value of setting up now a sustainable tourism standard again in Sri Lanka? We had that already. Yeah, I think if we want to sell the destination, we have to get into a standard that is globally recognized and then also certified by an independent body in a transparent way. Only with these certifications, the importers can import, the tour operators can sell, the booking platforms and the search engines can sell the product as sustainable. And that's the reality that we have to understand. We see the commitment here of the private sector and the interests also. Yeah, since we have started to work on this, we got a lot of requests, and we also want, of course, to encourage all the government stakeholders to acknowledge also that reality. We know a lot has been done in Sri Lanka, maybe much more than in other countries, not only by the private sector, but even maybe when it comes to labor standards. But the question now is to set up the frame and to get certified in a globally recognized way. I think that's really very important. And you have mentioned the example of Bangladesh, which was really the bad boy when it came to sustainability, but which has also managed during the past years to develop in an incredible way that nobody would have predicted. If you see today, the exports in apparel to the European Union, also in particular to Germany, and I know what sustainability standards are required even by discounters and price-oriented importers. It is really amazing also what has been achieved in Bangladesh, and we always should have that in mind. We are in a competitive world. There are competitors here in South Asia, but also in Southeast Asia, and I think therefore to understand that is an opportunity we have prepared internally very much, but we haven't documented it apart from the big players now, or certain players here in Sri Lanka. And that's a must, to follow these certifications that are globally recognized to get the broader market access and to use that maybe also as a marketing tool, actively as a marketing tool, but in a way that is transparent, that is recognized. And I think that's an important message what I wanted to send out again. Also, the certification as such is also not enough. The audits that are taken in the field of sustainability are walk-in audits sometimes, and it's a continuous process. You have to show that. And you are right, in the pandemic, if we see the Brandix case as well, we have seen that there were deep concerns that had led also to a political discussion in Europe. We had an official discussion in the German parliament about not the particular Brandix case, but about working conditions during the Covid-19 pandemic in the apparel industry. There were discussions about forced labor and so on. We know the media reports, and we have to take that very serious.
Just want to get to Ravi and also Sarinda about a large number of players in many of these industries are really SMEs. They are small players, and I think one of the things that they consistently echo is that yes, we see the value of this. We don't have the resources to kind of do the documentation, setting up the chains and so on. What are your advice from all three of you to these SMEs? Because I think we're working with them, but they have a long way to go. Some of the bigger players may have the resources on the way. Can you all share some of these resources, your frameworks, your tools? Yes, please.
Sarinda, over to you.
Yeah, may I go ahead? Andreas, I just want to address something that you said earlier in terms of garments without guilt and the definition of sustainability. And I think you made a very, very valid point. But what we have to look at is the context of the time that happened.
Yeah,
At
exactly.
the time that it happened, there were no real formal audit methods put in place. Whereas now you can't enter the door through our customer without having all those things in place. And the standards that we have always tried to maintain, and I'll speak for MAS here, is that we have always tried to be ahead of what the customer has asked for. And that is where, things like Women Go Beyond started and all our environmental sustainability programs started, is trying to be ahead of that. And now that there are some extremely stringent and very, very strict compliance guidelines, not just guidelines. If you don't pass them, you don't get orders. It's as simple as that. In most of the big customers that we deal with, you get one mark, you get a red mark, and you get a corrective action plan sent to you. If you don't make the corrective action plan twice, if you fail, you're out. That's it. I mean, it's like a 3-strike rule. So the world has become a much stricter place. Whereas in the past, and I will put my hand up and say we did it, we'd invent our own measures. At the company I ran at one point, we coined a phrase called water neutral. And we based it on carbon neutral, and we had a measurement to say that we were water neutral. So we came up with all this stuff in the absence of such controls in the past. But now it has changed quite dramatically. So it's a very different environment now. As for your question, Imran, on small and medium-term enterprises, if you want to play in this space, you have to play by the rules. So there are still a lot of brands. I think there are still a lot of brands that fly under the radar of international compliance, and they deal with some of these people. And a lot of the smaller and medium term operations, what they do is they piggyback on the big organizations by giving subcontract. I can speak for some of the people that we partner with. They don't have a choice. They have to meet the same compliance standards we do, but we do assist them a huge amount in obtaining that certification. We give them the training, we give them the manpower, we give them the documentation, we do the audits ourselves before the brand auditors come in the direct relationships. If you are going to play with the bigger players, you don't have a choice. That's the investment you have to make to be able to get a seat at the table.
Imran, if I can jump in at that point.
Please.
I think a game changer for Sri Lanka in terms of exports to Europe is the European Green Deal, which has been brought forward by Ursula von der Leyen at the European Parliament. And Andreas, I'm sure this is going to be the standard that everyone will need to comply with, because the European Green Deal is extremely clear about anything being imported into Europe. it has to be driven by renewable energy in terms of manufacturing, number one. In terms of the kind of raw materials that you're going to use, there are absolutely stringent standards. And even the logistics you use to get the product to Europe, even there are standards. So what one has to really understand as a nation that is playing in a global setup. Most of my work is in Europe. So I can share with you that, one thing I want to first state to all those watching this, especially if you're a supplier of anything to Europe, right? Or to any part of the world. Gone are the days that you can ignore things like the Green Deal and, put diplomatic pressure, etc., and say, please accept this, please accept that, because that's never going to happen. So the first thing that I want to share with with the audience is understand the seriousness of what is happening in terms of global supply chains first and foremost. Because sometimes when you talk to some of the small and medium enterprise leaders, or sometimes even the bigger leaders, it's as if, we have an option to comply or not comply. And I want to first take the word option off the agenda, because I think that has lulled some small and medium enterprise and even some big leaders to not move as fast and with as much urgency as is required. So if I was to simply take the area, make sure that national leaders at a policy level, the entire economic sector, including the banking sector, must be first brought up to speed with what is happening globally with the European Green Deal if we want to continue to export anything to Europe. Because I haven't heard anyone talking about the European Green Deal much. And I'm wondering why that is. I mean, by now, this should have been a Chamber of Commerce topic. This should have been seminars done day after day by sector in terms of what the meaning and the implications of this are. And I somehow find that is missing yet. So number one is that at a national level, because if, for example, we are having a GDP projection and assume that our apparel exports and our agricultural exports, I just want to focus on those two, will continue as usual, which accounts for about 80 to 90% of all our exports, I can assure you a simple analysis of where we are with energy in terms of manufacturing tells me we are extremely vulnerable. Why? Because our entire manufacturing strategy has not understood that to compete and meet the European Green Deal, we need to be now totally on board with getting renewable energy, manufacturing our apparel and manufacturing and getting into the agro side. I mean, we are going to be, completely left behind if we don't see these markers on the road. And I somehow feel, Sri Lanka's energy mix now is about 30% renewable and 70% fossil fuel driven. Now, when I look at the plans for moving forward with energy, because finally you need energy to manufacture anything, I find that the projection is 80% fossil and 20% renewable. Whilst the national leader is very clear, we want to be the exact opposite. We need to be 80% renewable and 20% fossil fuel. And that was actually the mandate on which this government came to power. 80% renewable energy by 2030. That was what the commitment Sri Lanka made at the Paris Agreement in December 2015. But when I look at the CEB and how they are going about with the long-term power generation plan, there's a plan called the Long-Term Power Generation Plan 2037. And when I look at those numbers, it's the exact opposite. They're looking at fostering more fossil fuel. So I just want to raise this issue because if we don't realize that the new standards are going to want us to change, And at a national level, we haven't figured out how we are going to help all our manufacturers to move into those kind of energy resources. Then we are basically hamstringing all our manufacturers. So I think there is a need for understanding the reality of the global market, understanding the standards that are required in the European Green Deal, then aligning our energy strategies, etc., to be able to comply with the emerging standards. So I think there is a lot of leadership needed at a national level also, as opposed to just the business level. Because even if Sari says, I want to make sure everything that MAS makes from now is made with renewable energy. Now, I know MAS has done a fantastic job in moving into as much renewable energy. I think they are about 20-30% already, and that's a massive improvement when I look at some of the companies in Sri Lanka. But for Sarinda to be able to say, by 2030, we are going to be 80% or 100%, he can't do this on his own. The national policies must now support him to be able to, for Sri Lanka to compete in the world market. So supply chains require policy changes and policy actions, which basically support the compliance of the standards that are out there.
Yeah, I think that discussion is also important, and especially with regards to the Green Deal. But now talking about sustainable supply chains again, now enterprise or business oriented, I think that's a merely a political discussion. Yeah, as you said, of course, the electricity generation plan 2037 was set up by the former government. That we also have to say. Then, of course, there are so many aspects. I don't want to go into detail. There are certain commitments of the Sri Lankan government. You mentioned 80% that has been corrected down to 70% 2030, but I think it's still a very good goal. Sri Lanka is part of the Vulnerable Climate Forum and so on and so on. So we have net metering plus system. We had a big initiative of the private sector, also MIS there again, also with all the difficulties feeding in electricity into the grid. But I think now coming back, because I'm thinking now about the SME that you were mentioning, Imran. And of course, for the SME, it is very important to know where can I get support, and also maybe to encourage public institutions to have the idea of sustainable supply chains being addressed in a more strategic way. So support, when it comes now to our side, we have identified 3 major sectors here in Sri Lanka: rubber, apparel, and food. And as I said, we are informing the companies that are active in this sector, and then doing also and offering individual gap assessment. So the internal procedures will be analyzed, having always in mind the key international recognized standards for sustainability, and then individually procedures will be adapted. Of course, then the certification process, the audit, has to be done independently by the company. Yeah, we can only prepare for that. And of course, there is a cost also involved. We all know that. But I think it's a good investment. And there, I think, comes also now then the role of the public sector. We would definitely welcome it if key institutions in Sri Lanka, such as the Export Development Board, would have their own officers for sustainability. I think the support for the SMEs, because it's cost and time consuming, that should be enlarged through all opportunities that we have. So of course, foreign agencies, we are also closely cooperating in that field with the UNDP. Yesterday, we had a big event for the food industry here in Sri Lanka with regards to standards for human rights and responsible business. And but I think also other agencies, and to concentrate our know-how and to have the public institutions also on board. I think that's very important. It would be a very important sign for the exporters if the major organization, the Export Development Board, would create key capacities in that field.
Excellent. Thank you for all the assistance you give. And I think FNF Sri Lanka office is also doing some work on that. I think the key part of that is because you see us as partners. And I think we're very happy that that kind of support is there. I have a question for Ravi. Sustainable supply chains is also not just about the ecological aspect of it, which a lot of companies love to address, but there is a political and human rights aspect as well. And while companies cannot, influence, some of the larger players may, but some of the smaller companies may not have opportunities to influence national level, human rights and political rights. But at a micro level, at their company level, they can facilitate, the exercise of some of the political and human rights that are enshrined in our constitution from a corporate perspective. What advice do you have for companies in terms of, empowering their employees to do that?
Yeah, so I think the term sustainability looks at people, planet, and profit. So, and the moment we use the word sustainability, it implies that we are taking our people as importantly as we take the planet and as we take the profits. I mean, the profit shouldn't be at the expense of compromising people or the planet or the ecology. Right. So getting on to the people side, which is really what you are now talking about, I think majority of our manufacturing exports are people-centric. I mean, if you look at the apparel sector and the agro sector, they are both driven by number of people. And so if we haven't understood and managed to really grasp what those standards are, what those requirements are, and I remember when we were at MAS, there was like 3-4 audits, Sarinda, probably 5-6 audits a year from every one of our manufacturers who came in and did the human rights audits, the whole labor audits, the labor procedures, and I think companies in the front line of this know that these are going to happen almost probably. I think there was a time we used to have an audit every month, and I think we said we need to have a team only working on the audit because the fact is there. So I think the key message I have for all those who have any human resource working for them is to understand this is no longer a question of whether someone will find out whether you are in any way compromising her audit quality or an audit statement. Because, the situation is now, I think I would now say that meeting human rights and labor standards is no longer a nice to do hygiene. It is now a hygiene factor. It is like, if you don't get that right, you might have the world's best product manufactured here. We don't want to know about it, because if you haven't got the labor and human rights sorted out, forget about it. Because I think the misnomer is, if we have a great product, everyone is going to, overlook all these other things. So let me be extremely forthright and tell every small and medium enterprise or big enterprise, this is no longer going to be the case. If you haven't really understood these standards, meeting all the other standards of ecology is not going to get you there. So I think my message is very clear. Either you comply 100% or expect not to be able to supply to these markets. I'm sure Sarinda will have something to add to that.
Actually, no, Ravi, you said it all. I think it's now it's like the basic pass to be able to get into the stadium. Otherwise, you're out in the parking lot.
Absolutely.
And also, I think there's another phenomenon that has happened right now with things like a mobile phone access that people have. It has democratized communication. So there are platforms like Facebook, there are platforms like Twitter, Instagram, all over these platforms. People can, from within the organization, start talking about any kind of inappropriate behavior, any kind of breaking of rules. All that gets publicized real time now. So organizations can't cheat, because you're ultimately just damaging yourself. We have to realize that the world is a completely different place. And I've been at MAS for 21 years now, and I do to a great extent toe the corporate line, but what I truly believe in is that we have always, and this is something that gives me the clear conscience in being able to speak at forums like this and hold my head up high in society, is that we have always had the highest level of compliance that we could.
Yeah, and I think what's very important is to anticipate trends. I think you did that always as MAS, but I also know that even SMEs have done that here in the past, especially in the food sectors that were getting in a very early stage in certification processes such as fair trade and other norms in the food sector. And we have seen that last week also when we organized the organic conference, how important that was. No, we had pioneers like biofoods or like target agriculture that have been achieved market access already 15, 20 years back and now are established partners for world's leading retail chains. That is all possible. I think to anticipate the trends and also to assume the own responsibility. I think that is something what we share very much with our partner here in the project, the Naumann Foundation, the responsible entrepreneurship. It's really something what is a must, not from the moral point of view only, but also from a pure commercial and business oriented point of view, to anticipate these trends and to understand them also as a reality to come, and then to adapt before others maybe do it, and in that way also the market access. And I would like really to encourage everybody to have a deep look into it, really from a pure business point of view. Of course, the moral aspect is very important. We are all committed by heart to human rights and all these standards. But just now speaking as a representative of the German Chamber of Commerce, just to see it from a pure business point of view. You can earn a lot of money or you can lose a lot of money because you will not have any more this market access. Of course, the market access will stay for certain products that are exported for diasporas, but in small volumes. But if you want to get really into these markets, the European Union or the US, I think it's very important to deal with these topics in detail.
Thank you. Andreas, this is one quick question before we wind up with concluding remarks from all of you. Can you give us some examples of countries that have used sustainable supply chains to get competitive advantage within the EU? Some hope for some of different industries.
I also maybe want to change the sector now a little bit. We have been talking about apparel a lot and about the food industry. And I think if we see the current situation here in the country, it is a fact that export earning is urgently needed. And one of the largest export earning industries was the tourism industry. We had until 2018 about $4.5 billion flowing into the country. The income has been reduced by 98%, and we know all the foreign currency situation. And now your question, so we have tried also to identify examples of countries that have invested a lot into sustainable tourism. And one of the countries definitely is Costa Rica. So Costa Rica, a country with 5 million inhabitants, 4 times less than Sri Lanka, had now in the year 2019, more than 3 million tourists. We can say about 70% of the tourism industry in Costa Rica is sustainable or somehow sustainable certified. There was a very close cooperation with the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. The standards have been adapted. Many hotels, many DMCs, many tour operators have been certified. And of course, we cannot compare one-to-one Costa Rica and Sri Lanka, but there are similarities. We have to see that. And we have to see that in a quite small period of time, Costa Rica was able to position itself worldwide as one of the leaders. And therefore, also a destination certification would be very important. Yeah, when we talk about certification in the field of tourism, we have, let's say, 3 sorts. 2 major private sector certifications, one for hotels and the other ones for DMCs and tour operators. And then we have the destination certification. And the destination certification depends a lot on policies that have to comply with the standards that have been set up by the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. That was also part of our meeting, and then having in mind that due to a survey that has been done by the major travel associations in Europe, 70% of the European tourists said that sustainability is a major criterion for their decision where they will do their future holidays or vacation. So that's a sector that is continuously growing, and in between there have been now search engines which are connected to Amadeus and other booking systems with tour operators and with online portals that screen the hotels, the DMCs and so on, and also the destination. Of course, it is a big plus if you go into a destination certification, because then you can show, of course, we have private DMCs that we have already here. We have Aitken Spence, for example, and we have Jetwing Travels and joint venture with their touristic as Go Vacation and Kiwi Trails that have been already certified by Travel Life, which is the certification body for DMCs and hotels. And to get additionally then a destination certification, in my opinion, would help a lot to promote tourism. But also there, you have the discussion, I think that, Sarinda, you have conducted maybe 15 or 20 years back, and that was a different period, as you well pointed out. Should we go for our own standard, or should we directly go into a international certification? And I recommended that also to the Minister of Tourism and to the chairperson of Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority. It is very important that if we do something here and invest in certification, that these standards are globally recognized, because otherwise the partners cannot sell the product. Yeah, so for them, it is a definite plus if you have a Travel Life, a Tour Cert, a Green Globe or whatever certification that you can use then to market the destination. And also there for Sri Lanka, we have to say, we have quite a lot of private players that have invested a lot. And for me, there are really also examples for the Asian tourism industry when we think about, for example, Jetwing now, that has done a lot when it comes to the avoidance of plastic, to local sourcing and many other aspects in the social context and environmental context as well. But there are also even smaller players like Kitesurfing Lanka, like the Tinai, even the Fox Resorts. They have invested in different forms of sustainability, and they are also about to document it in a way that is internationally again recognized. And that is something where I think Sri Lanka could also inspire itself. A lot has been done, but maybe not documented in the way that it should be to be able to sell it outside. And that could be a good step. And a country like Costa Rica, where I think, okay, it's smaller a little bit, but it's also a developing country, also a country that not everybody would have on the map when he thinks about the holiday. And we had in 2018, we had, I think, 2.1 million tourists here in Sri Lanka, with conventional tourism, also with a certain form of mass tourism that always was there by larger tour operators, but also with boutique hotel and luxury tourism. And that a country that has 4 times less inhabitants, like Costa Rica, was able to manage to get 3 million tourists with a strong focus on sustainable tourism shows that such a model can work. Not only to think about Europe, also think about Japan, about South Korea. The conscious is growing also in these markets that have a very high purchasing power. And I think with a good marketing strategy to integrate the topic of sustainability in the destination marketing, that would help a lot.
Thank you, Andreas. And the good news is we're actually focusing specifically on sustainable tourism, in a separate part of this webinar series. And some of the examples that you mentioned, the personnel in charge of them will be on this panel as well. Look, this whole COVID thing. Go ahead.
I just want to add a little thing to what Andreas said. Costa Rica added an estimated $6 billion to their GDP by going down the sustainable tourism path. $6 billion.
Yes, I hope we have listeners today. Really,
I think there is at the very highest level of both the country, the example being organic farming, and even at the tourism board level. I think at the very highest level there is a consciousness of what needs to be done. And I think it's a matter of filtering it down to the multiple layers that are organizing and deploying in the countries is where we need to really be focusing on. But we are actually out of time. It's a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure we will discuss more of this. But there's one thing that we do, a little bit of fun thing that we do at the end of this, webinar series, because it's been a very serious topic. We've talked about many important things. But for the individual, right, the last 18 months has been a very traumatic period. I think we're looking at another quite a few months more before this ends. But we are not going to be the same person that we were, before this pandemic. This is a life-changing kind of situation. What one advice would each of you give very, very quickly to the individual that is watching, what will make them successful in a post-pandemic world?
It would be to be responsible, and to anticipate trends and to understand the need of recognized and transparent certification. That was my message,
I think the first thing is that I don't think the pandemics and the COVIDs are going to go away. So I think we need to now begin to realize that we are going to have to adapt to a post-COVID world. And I think the post-COVID world we are talking about, you might call it COVID-19 this time, it might be something else 18 next time, it might be whatever 21. But I think the reality of the world is because of its global connectivity, we are going to be constantly under pressure to adapt ourselves to the new reality, which is, I think, not going to go away. Because I think there is a misnomer that it's going to go away. And I mean, if you watch today morning news, Oxford University has said the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer vaccine is going to be losing its efficacy in 6 months. So which means we might need a third dose, as per the news. So I think one of the things that the one word I would probably leave with all our business leaders and national leaders is have a code red strategy ready in your company for continuing business in that kind of situation, because the word code red is where we are constantly in an emergency situation. But it is not only when there is a crisis that we bring code red in. I think we have to be now adapting to code red 24 hours a day, because this is going to be the new reality the world is going to operate in. And if you look at all the IT companies in the world, they made record profits this year, right? Every single one of them in Q2 have busted their commitments by 150%, which means they found a business opportunity in a crisis. And I think adapt to the new reality and look for creating a business opportunity within the crisis.
Sarinda?
I think these two gentlemen kind of covered everything that I had to say. But I'm going to go a little more personal. I'm going to start looking at things a little more personally. I think when you're looking at it from a personal point of view, Ravi made a very valid point that this could be the reality. So from a leadership point of view, there are a lot of things that we learn. For example, the fact that working from home or working from anywhere actually does work. We have been functioning as we have been functioning before. And if we can do it on a systematic basis, not working from home permanently, I would go nuts if I had to do that, I think. But, where on a roster system, we bring in, say, 30% of our staff or 40% of our staff at any given time, the impact to planet on emission savings, on fuel savings, on electricity, all those things are going to be huge. The pollution of motor vehicles alone is going to be great, because if you look at, even now, if you look at Colombo, okay, today is a bad day to take as an example. The skies are a lot bluer because there are about probably 50% less vehicles on the road right now. So let's learn from what we have here. We have at MAS reduced our footprint, office footprint by about 30-40% already. And we're trying to make this a permanent state of work. That's one. On a personal basis, pay attention to your health, pay attention to your mental well-being, and continuously learn. I think this period has been one where we have actually had time to invest in ourselves as well, because we have been in kind of a rarefied bubble atmosphere. Of course, the other thing, and Ravi articulated it really well, is that this is the environment that we are going to have to work. This is the environment. So make this the reality, and how do you change the traditional ways that we have worked to function at full capacity in this environment. First thing is safety. You have to ensure that anybody who sets foot into your workplace is safe. So while paying attention to that, I think it's really important that we look at this as not a passing phase. This could be for the foreseeable future. And we have to learn to adapt and play in this environment and thrive in this environment.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure hosting all three of you in this wonderful discussion. I hope our audience took a lot of very important points away from it. We will continue with this webinar series, Restart 2021, and I hope to see all of you in another one very soon. Thank you very much and have a great day ahead.